It's getting really interesting, and I find it fascinating for many reasons. I've got Dr. Beatrice Maingi and Ken Oko. And you know, before we were talking about how much of it is natural versus learned, but I want to talk about even the legal aspect of it. Because in a lot of countries, polygamy, actually, I think in Africa, like about half the countries have legalized it and the other half haven't. In Kenya, it is legal, right? From a customary, I think the customary law. So why, I mean, why would it be illegal for adults to decide to come together and be as many as they choose to be? I mean, what are your thoughts on legalizing it? Is it part of what you were, mentioned earlier as it having economic effects, or where does the legal aspect come from?
Polygamy, according to the Marriage Act 2014, is allowed under customary law and also under Islamic law. So I wouldn't say that polygamy is illegal in Kenya. So if a couple would maybe envision that at some point they would want to enter into a polygamous relationship, then they would have to choose under what marriage they want to fall under.
Right.
So if they fall under customary marriage, then they know that the marriage is open to polygamy. But if it's a Christian marriage, then that remains monogamous.
Right.
So the ground is there for any person who would wish to become polygamous under the Marriage Act 2014.
You know, the law is designed to pattern and to order life.
Yeah.
And when the legal minds, craft their laws, it is actually meant to keep us in check. And they realized, especially in Kenya and a few other African countries, like you mentioned, that they needed to ventilate the law, because they were saying it's monogamous, that's the law, but everybody else had a spare wife, a spare mistress, or whatever. So they were thinking, why don't we ventilate this and allow people to, naturalize that kind of life? Because instead of having a wife and then having two others hidden somewhere, the law now permits you to, express their interests in a customary, law, and tell the first wife that, hey, there's somebody else here, so that we don't have all these wars when people die, then people suddenly show up and say, oh, I was also the wife, I was living with him in such a place.
Yeah.
And so I think the law is just trying to ventilate what society is cultivating.
Right.
Yeah, and making it look like, okay, fine, Islamic law, Sharia, permits you to have four. And they don't always have four, but you can have two, you can have three, and they find it easier because it's already legally permissible. There's a statutory allowance for it. Yeah, than if you tell people no, strictly one man, one woman, and then, even when you look at people's behavior, it's not like that.
Right.
Yeah, so the law, I think, has to come in and kind of ventilate that situation.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about polyandry.
Polyandry started off, like I told you earlier, the matriarchal societies, where women had much more power and control over the men, like in Sri Lanka, the southern parts of Nigeria, and again among the Hopi of India. The women were controlling the economy, they control family life, and they're the ones who decide what goes. There are different versions of polyandry where you have like one woman married to different men living apart. So sometimes, just like the men in Nairobi, they don't know each other, but the woman visits them in turns. That's Adelphic polyandry. But then you have a situation which is like now the Kenyan polygyny, where the woman has the homestead, she's the one who heads the home, and then she has different houses for the men in that same compound. So either they go visiting her in turns, or she visits them in turns. Yeah, that's a more traditional, like the Nigerian one and the Ghanaian model, where they would now live that life knowing we are her husbands. Yeah, but the origin of polyandry was that familial union where a woman invites a man into her home, and then the man comes with her brothers. And then the brothers start having sexual access to this woman, and then they all become husbands, and life goes on. That's how polyandry was born. But now the Nairobi version of polyandry is a dogger's game. It's like the modern woman is happily married, but she has this young boy in Kileleshwa, who is also like, quote unquote, a Kwesai hubby. And every time the main husband is misbehaving, she's the other side. So Nairobi women today are picking up that quote-unquote habit and making it look like it's normal. Yeah, the same thing men used to do, mistresses and concubines.
Yeah.
The Nairobi
the
woman is
same
now.
thing men still do.
Shut up. Yeah. So
Still do. Okay.
the women are now upping their game, and we are beginning to see signs of polyandry in modern Kenya.
Yeah.
Which was unheard of.
Right.
Yeah, because women were always like, okay, society says a man can have multiple wives, quote unquote. It's not permissible, but it's allowed. I mean, it works. But a woman cannot have multiple husbands. So the polyandry in Nairobi is socially illegal, so to speak. Like she can never declare and say, oh, I have 2 men.
Well, but, you know, basing it off of your argument, can the law sort of ventilate, you know, try and accommodate that if that becomes more and more normal? And also, I even want us to go back to what we said, how much of it is natural. If there is that interest, then how much of it is natural versus learned? And why do we need the constructs around what a family unit looks like? This is legal, this is illegal, you can only marry up to 4 wives.
I think the boundaries is just to allow people to fit into what they prefer. And that's why we say like that there are some marriages where polygamy is allowed and others where it is not allowed. For example, in Christian marriages, in customary marriages. So the question is, where do you want to fit? And the reason why the boundaries would be put is just to bring order in the society and to ensure that everyone has the box into which they want to fit. Do I want to be in a polygamous marriage? Then I had better have my marriage under customary law. Do I need to be in a monogamous marriage? Then I had better fit within the Christian marriage. And in that way, then there is some sort of order in the society. Yeah.
I keep advancing the argument, and the other day we had a long one with the FIDA fellows, that the family and the law don't go together at all, because the family is a social unit, and everything about the family is social. So the minute FIDA comes and says, oh, we are charging this man with marital rape, you know, the other men are looking and thinking, but at what point did he get there? How did you go to rape your own wife? You know, so the law will say, oh, marital rape, okay, we're going to jail you for 12 years. But society will say, apana, let's find out why the guy did that. Why would you go and have, you know, non-consensual sex with your own wife? Yeah, because that boundary is not there socially. So when you look at the social constructs, we have the normative structure. The social norms are more powerful than the law. Because when you look at age, for example, the law allows you to marry even a 90-year-old man. You can just decide, this is S, I'm going to do this. But then when you go home, guys in the village will tell you, no, you're not bringing that guy here because you're not socially admissible. You know, if you're like 25, 30, you marry a guy who's 90, then society will just ostracize you and say, okay, you live with him out there, but don't bring him here. Same thing with, again, when you look at the gender roles, usually it is typical social norms for a woman to marry a man who's a bit older. But again, even that is being turned upside down. Now women are marrying men who are younger. You know, so things are happening, and a lot of times the law has, I keep saying this, maybe it's an unpopular argument, but the law has no place in family life because everything in family is socially constructed. And so when you make a mistake inside that family, and for example, you have sexual relations with your own daughter, which we have seen in the news in Kenya a lot of times, the law will be very vicious and say, oh, this and this and this and this, but society will give you a more sterner punishment, you know, by actually separating you from that family. Yeah, and saying what you've done is abominable, we can't allow that. But the law can probably jail you for 11 years and you come back.
I'm not sure I agree with that because there are certain societies and tribes that allow, for instance, for underage marriages. And so
Like
even if, and so even if you did leave it to society, they'd be like, but we're okay with that. We're okay with this 12-year-old being sold to this older man, and you know, and that's part of our culture.
Child betrothal is actually a social process. It's not somebody who says, okay, I have now come to take over this child and I have married her, I'm going to have children with her. It's actually a sequential process where you betroth the child to the guy. Like the Maasai, they do that. People think, oh, Maasai has married kids. But you know, you're given that child and the child stays with the mother up to a certain point, and then now, officially, she's handed over to you.
but there's also many children who've talked about being married off quite
Forcefully.
Yeah,
Forcefully,
quite
that's the
early,
word, yes.
and you know, end up having. I mean, essentially, it is rape with a much older man, and I think the law does have a space in the family unit to try and protect people, whether it's, you know, the wives who've been forced, or even the husband who, you know, in the should the occasion arise where he's been forced into something, children, and I think there is a point at which the two can intersect, but I wonder how much of it dictates life. I mean, are you open to? What are your thoughts on that, Dr. Beatrice?
Yeah, I think, like you said, the law protects marriage for underage children. And we have seen people prosecuted for such things. But then the other bit is that there's a lot of secrecy. Some people will not want to expose such things. Within the culture, if it is acceptable, then by the time the law catches up with such people, then a lot of it has happened. So it's only a few that the law catches up with, which may be prosecuted. But like you said, the law protects. But when it comes to incest, like he said, that is when now society comes out strongly to oppose. If it is a father having sleeping with the daughter, then the society will not ignore that. But underage marriages in some societies, it is accepted, and they are silent about it. But when the law catches up with such culprits, then the law takes its course.
Yeah. I mean, we've even totally digressed, but I thought that was interesting. You know, the intersection of law and family.
Yes.